my pleasure to introduce our lunchtime keynote, who's the Dean of the Haub School of Environment and Natural Resources, John Koprowski. There's more. As a leader in the Haub School, John has had the job of both protecting faculty from the unreasonable demands of higher administration, while also protecting higher administration from the unreasonable demands of faculty. That's a tough nut to crack. But John handles it with the same creativity and balance that he brings to all of his work. Thanks to his leadership and vision and the value he places on interdisciplinary, policy-relevant, conservation-forward work, we're able to organize events like this one, which might not be prioritized in the same way in other academic units across the country. So we're fortunate for that. John joined the Haub School after 20 years at the University of Arizona. A native of Ohio, he's always been just a little squirrely about wild and working lands. And his lifelong passion for biodiversity has branched out across the globe. He's taught courses in wildlife conservation and management that help students crack the hardest nuts of conservation in human-dominated landscapes with international efforts in Ecuador, Mongolia, China, Italy, and many other places. With more than 260 peer-reviewed articles, 7 books, including International Wildlife Management and forthcoming Squirrels of the World 2, John has shown again and again that science isn't something to squirrel away, but to scatter widely so others can benefit. Alongside more than 60 graduate students, he's built a cache of knowledge that continues to shape conservation practice around the world. John has remained bright-eyed and bushy-tailed throughout his career, earning recognition as a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Wildlife Society, the Explorers Club, the Linnaean Society of London. In 2022, he received the Aldo Leopold Memorial Award for lifetime contributions to wildlife conservation. The golden acorn, if you will, on top of a distinguished career. And of course, John's work has made him something into a media sensation. In 2010, the New York Times quoted John in their work, "Nut? What nut? The squirrel outwits to survive." In 2022, the Cowboy State Daily reassured readers that according to John, splooting is okay. And perhaps most memorably, in 2023, they turned to him for clarity on one of the nuttiest questions ever posed. Drug-sniffing squirrels, possible, but not practical. So please join me in welcoming John Koprowski, a scholar who proves that being just a little nutty can lead to some of the most important conservation work of our time.
Thank you, sir. It's a shame that there's no promotion feature for you, Jake, going forward, but I really appreciate that. You read the first part exactly as I wrote it for you, so, but appreciate the squirrel references. You will see a little bit of squirrel work here. You've seen a couple wonderful student posters. It really is an incredible honor to be here. I know the lunch spot is sometimes one that no one is willing to take on as a speaker. I am here to satiate your hunger for knowledge. I am here to quench your thirst for information. That's the challenge I've accepted by being here. So I really look forward to telling you a little bit about how we make a difference in conservation. Really, that's what we're all here for. We are here to make as big a difference as we can. We have a skill set, we have the interest, the passion, the ability to make people come together and do more collectively. We've heard so much along these lines in all of the talks over these last 2 days. Let's clap and thank Temple and Jake, even though Jake gave me that introduction. Really amazing. I've seen them. Temple's office is right across from mine, and I've seen her kind of wrestle with all of these changes, and someone's flight is having issues and all of that. So really an amazing thing for someone who's an associate dean and a professor and also the director of a center on campus. So really appreciate that effort from our team. It's a pleasure to represent the Haub School of Environment and Natural Resources. And it's just fantastic having all of you here because you've put your family aside, you've put friends, graduate students, all of those kinds of things aside to be here. So I want you to know we really appreciate that time and effort. We heard Albert yesterday, we heard Chip talking about things that have happened in their lives and how we're all products of that background. And this is mine. I was born in 1961 in Cleveland, Ohio. And that's Cleveland, Ohio. Today, for those of you who don't know, it's on the Great Lakes in kind of the Midwestern part of the United States. And that's where I became interested in making a difference. Can you imagine a 7-year-old watching the Cuyahoga River burn in downtown Cleveland and not having that be part of who you are going forward? Asking your parents why water was burning in your city? That's part of who I am. The air that we breathed in those times when I was 10 years old, looking at this kind of environment, that's part of who I am. When I was 11 years old, couldn't wait to go fishing in that lake, Lake Erie. We'd run to the end of the pier and look at how many fish we were allowed to consume because of the mercury content of those fish. And if the answer was 2, boy, were we excited because that meant we could fish a little bit longer. Chip talked about bald eagles. When I was 12 years old, there were no bald eagles in Ohio, our nation's symbol. When I was 14 years old, I came on a backpacking trip that I worked 2 paper routes and shoveled 100 driveways at $5 a driveway to be able to afford. Jackson was 1,000 people then. Now it's increased by tenfold. Yellowstone, when I was in my 20s, Yellowstone burned. Many of us have seen that in person. When I was in my 50s, the study area, Benoit has been so helpful, and Lindsay's doing her work there. We've seen 85% deforestation during that time. Now, when I'm in my 60s, the Earth has warmed a couple of degrees Fahrenheit. Now in my 60s, recent analysis suggests that of 5,200 species, 69% have declined. All of this during my lifetime and making me part of who I am today. Also, in my 60s, this is that river that burned. Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, that's Cleveland today. It's actually, couldn't get a good picture from Cleveland, that's Los Angeles up on top, but similar. Bald eagles are back. These are the numbers in Ohio, from 0 to 160 breeding bald eagles. Yellowstone National Park's recovering. Many of us have seen that. Grizzly bears are now common in the GYE. Wolves have been introduced and are thriving. And as I stand here in my 60s with this amazing group, I've been fortunate to work in all these locations, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of those partnerships that are due to the hard work of graduate students, the hard work of many of you as partners. But it is my great honor to be able to use the few skills that I have, finding good partners to elevate their impact. And this conference is a continuation of our ability collectively to have impact. I want to take you to the Ganges River, and I want to introduce you to a PhD student of mine, Sambhu Paudel. He graduated about 7 or 8 years ago from the University of Arizona, where I was previously. He was a WWF Russell Trained Fellow, and he was working on these freshwater dolphins. Many people may not even know there are freshwater dolphins. This is a freshwater dolphin, looks a little different from Flipper, if you remember that, if you're as old as me and remember that TV show, the Pacific bottlenose dolphins and that kind of thing. These are made to sit in the meltwater of the Himalayas, the Ganges River, and a series of the tributaries that drain from the Himalayas. They're about as big as me, and they're built to stay on the bottom no matter what the flow of water is, and to feed on fish. You can see tiny eyes, a big melon for them to be able to locate those fishes. There's a problem. Nepal was down to just 20 or 30 of these freshwater dolphins. And Sambu is interested in working with local communities to assess some of the potential conflicts. 3 dams were put up in the major tributaries right at the India and Nepal border. And we all know what electricity can bring. These are hydroelectric power dams. And so they bring many good things to communities that allow prosperity, that allow healthcare, all of those kinds of things, incredibly important. But they also hold back water that would have had a seasonal flow, so that we can have electricity coming throughout the year. And you can see how that changes the profile of that river that would be raging at this time with meltwater coming out of the Himalayas. You can see that a dolphin the size of me only has a few places they can fish there, and the local fishing communities only have a few places to fish, and they're the same places. And if you net one of these dolphins, they're air-breathing mammals, just so that everyone's clear. And if you net one, fishing stops. You can see the local approach to fishing, lots of large nets placed in these areas. And you can also see many signs of conflict between humans and between fishers and these dolphins. If you look in the upper right in particular, you can see some scratches. You can see that dorsal fin has a bunch of notches. Those have been carved by nets that these animals have been caught in. So you have a species that's coexisted for centuries with fisher communities, with people who in their stories tell stories of spiritual, the cultural significance of this species, now having this potential conflict where it means they won't be able to net fish. They won't be able to feed their family some of those fish and sell some of those fishes. And so what we did was to go into this community, these fisher communities, and work with local people who would become the experts on dolphin ecology. They were out there looking where dolphins were fishing, and they were also assessing where humans were fishing to minimize conflict. There was also the potential for ecotourism to result from this as the local people became experts. They believed the data, they were part of collecting the data, and this became the potential for a connection between conservation and between economic opportunity. And this family you see on the bottom left, we're walking down, this is their home just to the right. We're walking down the street and they were waving me in. So we want to show you something that changed our lives. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's a laptop computer. As kind of the dorky Western scientist, I'm like, it's got to be a laptop computer, how that would impact someone's life. Well, as I went into the house, this is what they showed me. A purple bike. Purple bike that is now seared in my brain, not just because it's a really ugly shade of purple, and you're going to see that shade of purple forever, but they started to tell me how this had changed their lives. First, I was ashamed that I went to some electronic computer, but when you look at that, does anyone see any hints of how that is important to them? Scream it. We're not going to have Temple run around with a microphone. So, transportation to school, you got it. Look on the back. You've got books for their son. Their son had been going to the local school just a few kilometers away. They were taking him about 20 kilometers each day to a school that enabled him to go to college, that went through 12 years of schooling and enabled him the opportunity for education. While their son was at school, the parent who took him to school on the bike would get cell phone repair training. And both parents got that. So now there's a connection to of conservation in another way to a livelihood. And then ultimately, the other parent was working with us, becoming an expert on dolphins, the ability to start homestays, to work in their local dolphin conservation center. They now were tied to conservation in multiple ways. And that's what that purple bike symbolizes to me. It's that connection that any good partnership has, where it's a win-win situation, where you're in conservation, you're connecting someone, another person directly to conservation through, in this case, a purple bike. But that purple bike really is just a symbol of many different kinds of partnerships, right? When you're looking for a good partner, you are trying to find that connection. My wife Nancy's here. She still hasn't found that connection, but 40 years and 9 days ago, Nancy, you made the biggest mistake of your life, and I apologize for that. And so these economic incentives become important, but that purple bike to me is really what we look for in conservation. And for me, it was a bit of, it was that moment where I just realized this is what we try to do. And so all of us are looking for that purple bike. The purple bike can happen in many ways. I'm going to go through a number of different projects pretty quickly here. This is Hannah Brand. Hannah came into my office and she was an art and wildlife student and said, I'd like to do a comic book for children on recycling. I said, how about doing a comic book or a children's book on the relationship between elephants and humans? And Craig, you are going to get this book this spring. So the book follows a little boy through the landscape. He runs into an elephant and starts to learn about the elephant, look at some of the things they have in common, some of the challenges. Hannah, the first tree she drew on there was a Christmas tree, and not something you would find in South Africa. And this is a marula tree. We shared pictures with her. Those mountains in the background, I would hope that you recognize. They're for the local people, they are a common sight, and they provide a sense of connection to place. And then there's a great deal of important information, including squirrels as being part of the story. So Captain Squirrel has to have squirrels as part of any story. And it's also translated, so there's an opportunity to learn and practice English and to compare that to the local tongue. And so that's one way. You've heard from the black mambas, data, analyzing data and working with the black mambas, working with Transfrontier Africa, another way. Working with, I see a smile, Colette. You know her. This is the bush baby lady that you've heard a few times. I was able to go in and paint that entire school, which was a wonderful afternoon. And you can see I have very few skills, and now that that lack of skill applies to painting. But finding ways to connect with the community, work with local people is another one of those purple bike opportunities. Sometimes that collaboration and teamwork is incredibly serious. Ajay is here, Abdul, they're in that picture. We are going catching tigers and putting GPS collars on tigers. You really have to have good partners when you're doing this. And the people there are amazing partners, but the elephants are really the star of the show. They are the most amazing partners. And this is some of the work you saw on some posters, basically trying to minimize that conflict, like we were talking about with those river dolphins, trying to do that with large carnivores in the Chitwan region, in the national park and the buffer areas. Also, we've worked on Andean bears. If anyone ever watched Paddington, hands raised if you remember Paddington, the spectacled bear from the deepest, darkest jungles of Peru. Our Peru representative, thanks so much, Mariana. But we've worked in the high elevations of the Andes, in Chingasa Massive National Park. This is the water source for Bogota. It's also where there's a great deal of grazing that happens in this national park, some legal, most of it not. So all kinds of potential conflict. The government had been using a model solely of paying for depredations. And that works in many places. And they were basically using the same model that we've heard about in a couple cases today, or over the last couple of days. But as we ran public sessions and talked with folks about what they wanted out of this experience. They really did not want money for damages. They wanted to be heard. They wanted to be part of this and wanted to be long-term partners in these kinds of discussions. And they trusted governments less than NGOs. And the government had assumed it was the other way around. And a little bit of bias there, but so we've now been working through some NGOs and I think having much more impact. Forest regeneration in South Africa. Craig, our favorite dog. I know you like all dogs, but remember this well. You've heard so much about this system. I'm not going to tell you too much more, but these are marula trees, and you can see elephants are feeding on them. Just had a PhD student, Chris Banity, graduate defend last week. And when you look at these landscapes, what you see are these iconic trees, but what you don't tend to see are many small trees, small marula trees in particular. And there's a concern that elephants pushing over trees is the major mortality factor. They sure do push over lots of trees. And there are a few reasons. Sometimes it's getting moisture. Sometimes it's probably just because I think I can push that tree over, and they push the tree over. And so when you look at this system, though, elephants aren't the only thing that's changing. You heard talk of climate change, the density of brush. That means lots of other things like small mammal densities could change. And when you look at what can happen to a marula seed, some of you could buy this in the store as amarula, a wonderful liqueur that I highly recommend for those of you who are interested. Elephants can eat them and squirrels can eat them. Coming back to squirrels here, the theme for today. And squirrels also, they like to climb and eat seeds, but they're not beyond letting elephants do the hard work and then just walking on level ground and digging a seed out of one of those elephant patties as well. So lots of possible fates. And as it turns out, we know that adult trees get pushed over, but if you put marula seeds on the landscape at random locations, they're removed, 80% of them are removed in just a couple of days, and in a week, they're all gone. In some years, we found as few as 5 seedlings that are the only thing that have survived kind of that first round. And Chris was looking at all of these different factors, and as it turns out, the most important influence on elephant activity and damaging trees is water hole distance. And those are artificial water holes that are being put in. And you've heard a couple of references to that. It's a way that we manage wildlife in those environments. We do it here in Arizona, where I was for 20 years, really common way of attracting wildlife. But there are other consequences that come with it that demonstrate the complexity and the need to be able to understand the complexity of that system. Listening to local communities. This is part of Chris's dissertation. He went into a couple of local communities and asked people questions and then had them score them from a strongly disagree scale of 1 to the far right, strongly agree, and asked this simple question. I believe elephants should be managed via culling, which is the removal of elephants on the landscape to protect marula trees. And you can see in these communities, 2 different local communities, that there's really strong disagreement with that. And similarly, when you look at their view of local protected areas, you see the opposite, that these are valued as well. So elephants are valued, these protected areas are valued. The complexity of the situation then is what has to be dealt with as we move forward. Also working at the border. This is with Cuenca Los Ojos. You saw Valerie talking a bit about this, looking at the impact of the border wall, a highway adjacent to the border wall, and how that can be influential and create some challenges here between 2 countries, as well as various communities. And just quickly, you can see that this is distance from border, and black bear and white-tailed deer, some of the more mobile species, are the ones that are most impacted. Distance to the highway, lots of smaller things are impacted. So you've got 2 parallel barriers that are making passage for most species incredibly difficult. And a lot of what we try to do is just increase capacity. One of the most exciting things for me is working with students and increasing their country's capacity, their career, accelerating their career. And you can see, can my graduate students, I think there are 5 of you in here, could you just stand up? I want to thank you for all this. You're going to, thanks. And so you're going to see their pictures here, and I don't want to give them too much credit because they're already so good. They can't know they're as good as they are. So I'm going to quickly move by and pretend this is all my work. But we're working on a variety of different approaches, a variety of different questions, all focused on conservation. And I'm really proud that we've had graduate students from 11 different countries and 2 different tribes. It is probably the most rewarding aspect of my work, in large part because I know that their impact is going to be over the next 30 or 40 years. So really have appreciated their efforts, and that's how all of this happens. And that's why I remain optimistic about the future, knowing these amazing folks, so many of you in this room, are going to be working on the challenges of the future. I want to take you to Mongolia. We've heard a little bit about it. We'll hear a bit more from Justine a little bit later today. But I was able to go over there just to teach a course. Zoological Society of London brought me in 2006 to teach an undergraduate course for sophomores after their sophomore year from the National University of Mongolia. Took them for 3 weeks out in the Gobi, and I taught desert ecology and animal census techniques. And there also had another co-instructor from the UK who came. We set up gears, we ran portable generators and gave PowerPoints in the desert and taught, here were fluorescent powder tracking gerbils on the bottom left. But it was an amazing experience for me because it really opened my eyes to the ways that we can have impact and the ways that I wanted to have impact, that I think were finally crystallized by that purple bike that you saw a bit earlier. And in this experience, you had the opportunity to work with folks that you hoped were going to have an impact. I just came back from a conference in Mongolia, and 4 of the 15 Mongolian students in that class were at that conference leading in conservation in some way. No way that anything I can do can have that kind of impact, than having these opportunities to train. And it was a crazy time for me. This is 2006. I had hair, and there's actually a little bit of pigment in that hair, which you have to squint to see that. But that's what I looked like after just a day in Mongolia. Now, that was 3 weeks afterwards, but this road is now paved, that we were in a dirt road 20 years ago. But an amazing opportunity for me to learn, me to listen, me to hear people. As well. And just this last May and June, I was able to take 17 students with Steely, a graduate assistant for the course, and do most of that same trip again and see their excitement, see their enthusiasm. Plus, it is amazing to have fifth generation Wyomingites, which is a big deal here. If you are often, if you're in a ranching family, that's what you lead with, how long you've been here in Wyoming. It was wonderful for those students to say, to a herding family, they've been here for 5 generations. And the herding family literally saying, oh, so you're new at this. And that perspective, landscapes look really similar. It is Wyoming. Mongolia is Wyoming. But to have that person say, oh, you're new at this, and watch the response of the student, and then the student saying, you've been here for how long? 12 generations. And they're like, wow, that's a long time, And then in that same discussion, they said, oh, for another 8 generations, we were over there. And it was literally 100 meters away. So, that sense of time and place, but also the camaraderie of that connection to the land was just amazing. And that changing perspectives in that opportunity, similar. We know that Yellowstone National Park is the oldest national park in the world. If all you're looking for is national park at the end. This is Bogd Khan, strictly protected area outside Ulaanbaatar, a city that's now at 1.6 million. It was about 1 million when I was there in 2006. Genghis Khan set this up and provided protection to it. We heard from Dr. Jala that this is relatively young compared to, was it 300 BC? Yep. So there are many places that have had that kind of protection and that ethic and the connection to conservation. We've had the pleasure of working there with the Mongolian Academy of Sciences, and you'll notice most of these papers are primarily authored by Mongolians who are leading a bunch of this work, whether it's techniques on an endangered species, whether it's setting up biodiversity monitoring programs, or looking at the impacts of livestock. When you look at species that have been associated with Mongolian grasslands for many years, like horses and humans, if you look at their the increasing number of horses, increasing number of humans, and then look at what's happening with those increasing densities in deer, red deer, elk, or wild boar, you see that more of these species. People even don't have too much of a negative impact, but a newcomer on the ground, cattle, that are excellent ways to make money and have a high marketable value, have negative impacts on all those native species. And we're looking at wolves. Lots of talk about wolves. You saw that 1.6 million Ulaanbaatar right up next to this, the oldest protected area. And when you look at the data that we've collected in this national park, you can see that as prey numbers increase, so does wolf abundance. That makes sense. But you also see increasing human density, increasing wolf density, increasing feral and stray dogs, and increasing wolves. You can see the collision course that Mongolia is on and wrestling with. Working as a partner, being part of a research team, we go over, in this case, every spring, talk with the team about what they want to accomplish, how the writing from the previous winter went, where are those publications at, how can we all work together. We get our plan for the coming field season, and then we go back at the end of the field season and have those conversations where it's tell us where we're not being good partners. How can we improve? And having those discussions as well as setting the agenda for the summer and for the next year. When you're working to be partners, you're setting up agreements. Here we've got a couple of different agreements with national universities in Mongolia. I go to the Mongolian embassy in DC whenever I go to try to increase awareness of some of the challenges there. And ultimately, we know that science is a global enterprise. That's why this wonderful idea that folks had to bring all of us together in this space is so meaningful. When you look at the percentage of scientific publications as just one metric to look at increases in collaboration across boundaries, whether you're looking at international addresses or international authorships, you can see that they're increasing dramatically. When you look at global connectedness, you'll see networks like this, where the nodes, the size of those circles are the number of publications that are coming out, and you can see which countries are connected. And that's been rapidly changing. This is from some social science collaboration, looking at those trends over time. You can see this move in many different kinds of spaces to be collaborative, to learn from each other, not just to produce things or tell people things, but to really be good collaborators, to really be good partners. And here's just another look that this is happening around the world. It's not just in one region. So the ability to be part of something like this, I hope this is the start of collaborations, not the end of, oh, it was a really nice meeting. I loved seeing a grizzly bear at Yellowstone National Park, but I hope that we've built some trust, we built some relationships, that we see some purple bikes, and that we can keep moving forward. So I think that getting together like this is important. We're in my case, presenting and probably talking too long. I guess I have 6 minutes left. But I think we really learned very little by speaking, except how boring we are and how poorly we prepared, which I apologize for that as I learn that right now. But we learn a little bit by hearing, but it's really by listening. That's how we really learn. And so there's been lots of wonderful listening that's gone on here, and I know there'll be a lot more. And so why are we doing this? To make a difference? Nancy, can you take a picture of our daughter? Because she will just be horrified when she sees this. And we're doing it for the next generation, right? We are working to make sure there are opportunities for them, that the new ideas that we are going to need to make a difference they're going to have those ideas. They deserve those opportunities, whether it's kids from any of these countries or my daughter Emma. She's a little older now. She's 29, I believe. And so she'll be horrified to see that. But anytime you can horrify your daughter, that's a good day. So I challenge you to make a difference. We're all trying to do that. And I think this idea of kind of finding the purple bike is an easy way to think of what is the purple bike in this situation. We need a partner. What can that purple bike be? We've done it in a bunch of different ways, as you've seen, but I really want to thank you for listening, and apologies for slowing down your ability to get a second helping of food. It looks like they're all gone, so I'm really, I owe you. But I've got these little purple bikes that you'll see up there that say find yours. Got about 100 of them. I'll put them on maybe this front table by Pouget, and feel free to grab one as just a little bit of a reminder. Hopefully it's the message, but it can also be a keychain. And if you use the bicycle seat properly, it's a bottle opener. So that will get a number of people picking it up. But really thankful for your attention. I don't know if there's time for questions or if we do that here or not, but thank you.
Five minutes for questions.
Great.
Hi, John. Thank you. My name is Eric Atkinson. I teach at Northwest College in Powell, and I've seen a significant difference in my wildlife management students, especially this year,
Great.
where my students do not believe that wildlife are an international resource worthy of the United States involvement in the conservation. So how do you, with all of your experience, share aspects to help young people be open to finding purple bikes? What are your secrets to generating a younger generation of conservationists?
So for me, I start locally with this group because of what we're trying to accomplish here. I went with the international examples, but I start with local examples. First day on the faculty at University of Arizona, I was working on an endangered species that was only found at the top of a single mountain, the Mount Graham red squirrel, and about as insignificant in many ways as you might imagine, because it was literally just 1,000 hectares or so of habitat. And I thought, oh, I'm going to call the Forest Service. They're the ones who control this space, introduce myself and say, hey, let's start to collaborate. I called them up and literally they said, I'm sorry, we don't talk to the University of Arizona, and hung up. And at that time, I realized at first, you're a little hurt, but many people have done that to me over the years. And so for me, that was my problem. I should have been more prepared and not just assume, hey, a new person is all that this is going to take. So for me, that was a case where I realized I had to backpedal and build relationships, build trust, start to show some data. We were working in that space, and then go to public meetings, share some of the data, go to the annual meetings of Arizona Game and Fish and the co-op unit system, and share that information and slowly build that sense of trust and partnership. I think in that case, this was a very contentious, even though many people might think insignificant, tiny little mountaintop population. It was a situation where there was a lot of eco-terrorism. Vehicles were blown up in that area. When I took over, we weren't allowed to go up without having some support from the police to go into those areas. And so I start with stories that are local and have students come up with what would make this valuable? What are some things that this community might value? And then you can start looking at examples where road crossings or rope crossings that Australians have used for 50, 60 years were important in connecting canopies across a busy highway. Then you start to say, oh, wouldn't it have been nice for us to know this 30, 40, 50 years ago? And how might we have worked together to improve this? How might we have avoided some of the challenges we have? So when I'm in an audience where I think that is going to be a significant challenge, I take it as close to home as possible, let them come up with the ideas. And often my response is, that's a great idea. Are we doing it here? No. You know where they are doing it? They're doing it in Malaysia, and we don't have to invent all the ideas. And I think that starts to show a value to international relationships that can be hopefully more promising.
Thanks, John. I think we have one really quick one.
May not be quick, but thanks, John. How do we best transfer the lessons of your experience and people like you, and there are many in the room, to the next generation, so they don't have to wait till they're 50 or 60 to learn that?
Well, that's my first international experience besides going to Niagara Falls, which from Cleveland is like an hour drive, hour and a half drive, was really that experience in Mongolia. And I was 39 or 40 years old when that happened. I've been working and collaborating, but when I look back and think, boy, if I had another 15 years or 20 years, providing that 15 or 20-year jump, I think as a mentor, as someone who has the opportunity to elevate others, that's where we try to invest our time and effort. I think using local examples that we can learn more broadly from become important. I'm a first generation college kid. My mother went through 10th grade, my father went through high school, and they were just thrilled I went to college and didn't care if I had a 2.001 GPA. You know, life would have been great by them. I was a little higher than that, got into grad school, but having people believe, we've talked about the empowerment of women, we've talked about the community engagement that becomes important. I presented it here like that mostly is occurring in international locations from our perspective. We need to do those very same things here. And that's a challenge. And it's easy for some people to say, oh, I'm going to Kenya and I'm going to do this kind of work. But if we're not thinking about some of those principles that are transferable also and not willing to do it at home, I think that's a missed opportunity as well. Thanks, Susan.